AIFMD II and the UCITS review. What EU reform means for global fund managers. AIFMD II. Directive EU 2024/927 is in force, with national transposition due by 16th April 2026, and the UCITS review is following closely behind. For global managers using Luxembourg as their EU gateway, the practical impact is concentrated in 4 areas: tighter delegation and substance expectations, a new regime for loan-originating funds, mandatory liquidity management tools for open-ended funds, and expanded reporting. Managers who reassess their delegation model, substance footprint, and fund documentation early will protect their EU market access and avoid costly retrofitting later. Introduction. The stakes of EU reform for global managers. For managers who reach European investors through Luxembourg, AIFMD II and the UCITS review are not abstract EU technicalities. They reshape how funds are structured, delegated, and operated. Luxembourg's passporting advantage has always rested on a simple proposition. A properly authorised manager can market across the EU from a single domicile. That advantage is now only as strong as a manager's ability to satisfy tightening substance and delegation expectations. The headline position is straightforward. AIFMD II is in force, with member states required to apply the new rules from April 2026, and the UCITS Directive has been amended in parallel. A broader UCITS review is expected to follow closely. For managers in the UK, US, Switzerland, and Asia, the practical question is no longer whether to engage, but how quickly. This piece sets out what has changed, what remains in transition, and what it means for managers operating from outside the EU. What AIFMD II actually changes, and for whom. AIFMD II, Directive EU 2024/927, amends both the AIFMD and the UCITS Directive. It entered into force in April 2024, and member states, including Luxembourg, must transpose it into national law by the 16th of April 2026. In practice, the Commission de Surveillance du Secteur Financier, CSSF, will give effect to the regime through national legislation and supplementary circulars, with certain technical standards still to be finalised by ESMA. The timeline matters as much as the content. Some obligations bite on transposition, while others phase in or await regulatory technical standards, RTS. The scope is broad but uneven. The reforms affect all AIFMs to some degree through delegation, substance, and reporting. Still, the most consequential changes are concentrated in loan origination, liquidity management tools, LMTs, for open-ended funds, and the delegation model used by non-EU managers. The UCITS review runs on a separate track. The liquidity provisions have been aligned with AIFMD II through the same directive. Still, the wider UCITS 6 agenda, covering issues such as eligible assets, remains at an earlier consultative stage. Managers should treat the two as related but distinct. Delegation and substance, the reforms that matter most. For most global managers, this is the section that matters. AIFMD II preserves the delegation model. A Luxembourg AIFM can still delegate portfolio management to a manager in London, New York, Zurich, or Singapore. But it raises the bar on transparency and accountability. Regulators now expect a clear, documented view of the entire delegation chain, where functions sit, who performs them, and how they are supervised. Delegation reporting is expanded, and ESMA will conduct peer reviews to ensure that letterbox entities do not slip through the cracks. Substance is the other side of the same coin. A Luxembourg AIFM must demonstrably perform the functions it is authorised for, with at least 2 senior persons conducting its business in the EU on a full-time basis. It can no longer present a lean, local presence while substantive work is done elsewhere, without that arrangement attracting scrutiny. For a US or Asia-based manager acting as delegated portfolio manager of a Luxembourg AIFM, the message is clear. The local entity needs genuine decision-making capability, robust oversight of delegates, and the resources to match. The CSSF and ESMA are drawing firmer lines here, although precisely how far substance expectations extend continues to evolve through supervisory practice. Loan-originating funds. New rules, new obligations. AIFMD II introduces a dedicated, harmonised regime for loan-originating AIFs, the first EU-wide framework for private credit funds. Managers operating or considering credit strategies through Luxembourg should now map their structures against it. Key requirements include leverage limits, a cap of 175% for open-ended loan-originating funds and 300% for closed-ended funds, calculated on a net asset value basis. Risk retention. Managers must retain 5% of the notional value of loans they originate and then sell, discouraging an originate-to-distribute model. Portfolio composition and concentration limits. Restrictions on exposure to any single borrower where that borrower is a financial undertaking, fund, or certain other entities. Closed-ended default. Loan-originating funds are expected to be closed-ended unless the manager can demonstrate that liquidity risk is appropriately managed. The practical implication is that some existing private credit structures will need recalibration on leverage, fund form, and retention, and that new launches should be designed for the regime from the outset rather than retrofitted later. Liquidity management tools. An expanded toolkit with new responsibilities. AIFMD II makes LMTs a standing feature of open-ended fund design rather than a crisis measure. Managers of open-ended AIFs must select and provide, in their fund documentation, at least 2 appropriate LMTs from a harmonised list, such as redemption gates, notice periods, redemption fees, swing pricing, anti-dilution levies, and redemptions in kind, with side pockets also available. Money market funds are subject to a lighter requirement of at least 1 tool. The distinction that matters is between availability and activation. The tools must be available, built into the fund's rules and operational capability, even if never used, and managers must hold policies governing their selection, calibration, and deployment, with regulators notified in defined circumstances. The parallel UCITS amendments set equivalent expectations for UCITS, and ESMA's technical standards will specify the operational details. Open-ended fund managers were expected to review documentation and governance before the entry into force of AIFMD II, mid-April 2026, pending the RTS being finalised. Reporting obligations. What has changed and what is coming? AIFMD II expands supervisory reporting. The familiar Annex 4 regime is being broadened. The previous limitation to available information is removed, and the dataset is widening to include more granular information on delegation arrangements and markets traded. Detailed templates will follow in implementing technical standards, so the full picture will firm up as those are published. On the UCITS side, harmonised supervisory reporting is being introduced, narrowing the long-standing gap between the 2 regimes. Managers should treat the run-up to implementation as an opportunity to review reporting infrastructure, data sourcing, and vendor arrangements well ahead of the first deadlines under the new templates. Stricter requirements regarding national private placement rules. AIFMD II materially tightened the jurisdictional conditions under which non-EU AIFMs and non-EU AIFs may access EU investors through national private placement regimes, NPPRs, pursuant to Article 42 of the AIFMD. Under the original AIFMD, the relevant restriction was that the third country in which the AIFM or AIF was established could not be listed as a non-cooperative country or territory by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. AIFMD II replaces and broadens this test with a dual list requirement. The third country must not be identified as a high-risk third country pursuant to Article 9(2) of the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, Directive EU 2015/849. the so-called EU AML blacklist, and must not appear on Annex 1 to the Council conclusions on the revised EU list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, the EU tax blacklist. In addition, the third country must have signed, with each member state in which marketing is to take place, a tax information exchange agreement that fully complies with the standards laid down in Article 26 of the OECD Model Tax Convention. The practical consequence is that if either the AIFM or the AIF is established in a jurisdiction that is subsequently added to the EU AML blacklist or the EU tax blacklist, marketing under the NPPR becomes impermissible. There is no grandfathering for funds already on the AML list. However, a 2-year grace period applies from the date of the marketing notification or authorization, where a jurisdiction is newly added to the non-cooperative tax list. These changes take effect immediately upon transposition, and fund managers relying on the NPPR must actively monitor both lists on an ongoing basis, as any change to a jurisdiction's status can result in an abrupt loss of EU market access. What managers should be asking their advisors now? The reforms reward managers who act early, particularly on delegation and substance, and penalise those who wait until retrofitting becomes costly. A focused conversation with legal and compliance advisors should cover delegation. Does our delegation chain withstand enhanced reporting and ESMA scrutiny? And is each delegate's role clearly documented? Substance. Does our Luxembourg AIFM have the people, decision-making authority, and oversight capability the CSSF now expects? Fund type. Do our loan-originating or open-ended strategies meet the new leverage, retention, and LMT requirements? Reporting. Is our reporting infrastructure ready for expanded Annex 4 and new UCITS reporting obligations?